What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Lassercast. And boy, me and my co-host over there, Dr. Zayas God, Danny Torkel, are excited because one of our very favorite shows is back. Danny, what show is that?
Interview with a Vampire on AMC. One of our, I guess, really surprise shows of 2023. I think like we were watching this and like we went into Interview with a Vampire last year, kind of thinking like, hey, we cover horror stuff on the Lassercast. This is a horror show. Let's give it a shot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I don't know about you, but it really kind of surprised the hell out of me at how much I got into this show and how much I ended up genuinely loving this show. And it, considering it's AMC, it's still technically like basic cable. This isn't like an HBO Max or a Showtime show and it was very, very rated R in terms of both its sexuality and its violence.
Yes.
And I was very excited when I saw that it got renewed, and here we are. It came back last week. We were aping around with our Planet of the Apes month. And so we decided that we would cover episodes 1 and 2 tonight, and then probably record every Monday going forward when we can to, since it airs Sunday nights at 9 or Sunday at 10.
I think it's 9.
On AMC, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, you were mentioning how the show was like rated R and it's not like a HBO series. It's funny because there's not nudity in the show. There's a lot of sexuality. There's a ton of gore. But on last night's episode, the second episode of the season, I was expecting there to be some nudity just based on seeing the 1994 film, and then there wasn't. That kind of makes me just kind of bring up, I wanted to make sure we're on the same page. As far as Interview with the Vampire goes, you have not read the first book, but you've seen the 1994 movie with Brad Pitt, right? And Tom Cruise.
It's really funny that you decided to open with this because I got so into last night's episode that I went and rented the 1994 movie again on Amazon Prime for like $3.79.
Okay.
And I watched probably the first half hour before I fell asleep. And as soon as we're done recording and I make dinner, I'm going to pop open a beer and finish it.
Nice.
I saw the original 1994 film in the movie theater. My dad was a huge it's funny. My dad and Athena are very similar in that they read horror.
Right.
But they weren't the biggest watchers of horror. Athena is a watcher of television horror. Buffy, Supernatural, Walking Dead. She'll watch it if it's on TV. But if it's 90 minutes to 2 hours in movie form, she's like, nah, I'm okay.
Not interested.
My dad I don't really remember him watching a lot of horror movies, but he was a devoted Stephen King reader, and he loved Anne Rice books also.
Yeah.
And I remember it was like a huge topic of conversation when I was a kid about like, oh my God, I can't believe Tom Cruise. That's not Lestat. Oh, what terrible. And then my dad took me to the movies, and that's where I remember being like, oh my God, who's that angel on the screen? And it was Kirsten Dunst, who is 1 day older than me. She was born the day before me in 1982. And I'm like, I've like kind of had a crush on Kirsten Dunst my entire life since I was like 12 years old.
Yes. And see, that movie has an impact, I think. It's one of my favorite vampire movies. Her performance in that, really, that's what put her on the map. I mean, she's been in other things as a kid. But I always
remember the advertising for that, where it's like all the sexiest men of 1994 and this 12-year-old blonde girl.
And this little girl. Yeah.
Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Antonio Banderas, Christian Slater
Yeah.
and Kirsten Dunst.
Yes. Yes.
She
This is
had
pretty.
to have been the envy of every like adolescent girl in the world
Yeah.
in that.
There's a pretty famous picture of like all the guys like at a release party or something with her, and she's like in the middle of the crowd.
Yeah.
It's those dudes. But it's funny because I have not read the first book, but I've read The Vampire Lestat, Queen of the Damned, Tale of the Body Thief. Those are the 3 books that are after it, and I love it. The Vampire Lestat is one of my favorite books of all time. It's like my 2nd or 3rd favorite book of all time. My daughter Pepper, who's 13 now, she just read Interview with the Vampire for the first time, and it was interesting because she watched the movie with me, and then she was telling me how some parts were different. And now, as we go into these episodes of season 2, you start to see, oh, they're taking things from the book that are not in the movie, and they're putting it into the show. Yeah. So, one other thing as we get our conversation going, I just wanted to point out how I think that the casting in the show is superior to the casting of the 1994 movie. I love the 1994 movie, but one thing that me and my wife agree, and my daughter agree with, is that Louis is kind of lame in the first book, and even though he's played by Brad Pitt's kind of lame in the movie. But the Louis in this show is the best Louis out of all of them.
I love Jacob Anderson. I loved him on Game of Thrones, and I think he's really, really powerful in this show. And I like, you could just, it's funny because there's a lot of obviously reading their minds and like a lot of talking without talking in these episodes. And he conveys that so well with his eyes and with his facial expressions. The look on his face when you see the painting of Lestat, and like it's like you could just tell from the look on his face. Yeah, everything. You don't need a lot of dialogue there, and he's able to convey that. I was for the first 15 minutes of episode 2. And I'm sure we'll do a little catch up on previously, because obviously at the end of last season, last season's big ending is that Louis and Claudia kill Lestat and leave New Orleans. And obviously there's like a hint at the very end that he's obviously not dead. You see his hand come out of the crate and grab at a rat. So you know he's not dead, but they killed him. Right. So there's been a lacking of Lestat for these first 2 episodes. Right. And for about 15 minutes of episode 2, I was like, man, I miss Sam Reed because he's so fucking good as Lestat also. He is. Yes. And I'm just so excited to see next week's episode now, because it looks like it's going to be a flashback, like in part to the vampire theater, where it got its origins with Lestat on stage meeting Armand, which is something that I have never been a privy to, because they don't really show that in the movie, and I never read the book, so I'm excited for that. And I love the entire cast. Eric Bogosian had me hysterically laughing last night with some of his deliveries. Right. His line read of goes, "It's a Univision kind of night." Yeah. I was like, I think I laughed out loud legitimately with that. Yeah. When he when he figures out that it's Lestat in the painting and he goes into that, wow, I should have saw that coming, but I didn't see that coming. Right. And he goes, "Oh, so you had sex with Lestat, and then you and they're like, well, it was 100 years later, Right. And go ahead. No, it's just these actors are playing different versions of those 1994 characters, but I love the casting of the show, and I think that the actors have great chemistry with each other, whether it's Eric Bogosian and Armand and Louis, whether it's Louis and Claudia, whether it's Lestat and anyone, because I think Sam Reed is just the fucking best.
Yes, yes, yes.
But yeah, and we'll get on to for me, the highlight of episode 2 was an actor that we are both familiar with from another show that we've covered.
Oh, we'll get to him. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, what's interesting about the show and how he works, Eric Bogosian as Daniel. What's interesting about the show was that the book was released in 1976, right? They make it like the interview that we see in the movie, the interview that takes place in the book, happened in the 70s, but then there's some kind of change here where the interview ends. Something happened with Daniel and Louis. We don't know what's happened, and we're going to eventually find out. If you watch the movie with Tom Cruise and Christian Slater and Brad Pitt, you know, Christian Slater basically says, turn me into a vampire, and Brad Pitt won't have it. Then Tom Cruise attacks him and drinks his blood at the very end. It's a great ending, right? This show is building up to where there's this mystery as to what happened with Daniel. And we don't know. And I think that there's like a thing going on with Armand and Louis where they're trying to kind of pry it out of him. And there might even be this idea that Louis is not remembering the past exactly the way that it went down.
There's a lot of what's the phrase? There's the unreliable narrator.
Yes.
There's a lot of that where it almost feels like you're watching a vampire version of The Usual Suspects. Where Louis and Armand and they're reading from Claudia's journal. And it almost feels like, yes, they're telling their version of what happened, but they also could be making a whole bunch of shit up.
Right.
It doesn't really bother me. And it's funny, I watched the first half hour of the 94 movie, and it just starts in the hotel room with Louis and Daniel. And it there's no introduction. It's just like, I'm a vampire. Oh,
right.
Okay. And they sit down and he goes into the backstory.
Right.
And so whatever was in the book that about those two characters, they really completely cut out for the movie.
Right.
At least at the beginning. Whereas, like you said, they're hinting at this. They keep showing it's almost as if Louis and Armand were there with Daniel throughout his life, and they know things about him that they shouldn't know, and they like watched him at his lowest moments in bars, getting drunk and flirting with. Like, I think there was like a scene in the first season where he had like a almost homosexual, and they like mocked him for that, or they they brought that up in a way to like make him feel bad, and they made they're like mocking him, and to almost the point of tears in this episode 2, about how he proposed to his wife in Paris and she said no, and that's why like he's like belittling Paris and they're loving it, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's that scene is one of my favorite scenes out of the 2 episodes, because Daniel kind of serves as like a cipher for the audience. He mocks the vampires and this sort of like over the top gothic romance of the vampire world. And that's kind of like what the audience would be doing if they're just watching this in the theater. But then at one point they kind of turn it back on him and they use their kind of mental powers to belittle him. And I actually really like that scene, because it's like you are talking to these like ancient beings and you're talking to them as if they're jokes. And then they're like, no. We're going to fuck you up because we're paying you to do this, to interview us. And, you know, these things matter to us. Claudia matters to us. Our life history, our romance matters to us. We're going to put you in your place. Now, I think what's interesting about the show is that probably who's ever watching this show has either read the book or watched the movie. So they know like the beats. They know, okay, this is going to happen with Claudia. This is going to happen with Louis. Lestat's going to come back at some point. But just by the fact that they changed the time of the show and when things happen, that makes things a lot more interesting, right? Like in the movie and the book, Louis meets Lestat in 1791. So we're going back, over 200 years ago. In this show, he meets him in 1910. So it's a different America. It's a different story. And then of course, Louis is African American, right? He's like Creole.
Which which is we mentioned this last season when we, how by changing the character that in that like one way, and by it creates this amazing like other tension because it takes place in New Orleans, the deep South, in a time of legalized segregation, and here you have this wealthy black man who is treated with a little bit of respect but not anywhere that he would. And like literally again, the movie opens with Brad Pitt going, my wife died, I had a plantation, and he like goes back into his plantation house, and you're like, oh, he's like a rich southerner.
Right.
It's like the same, but it's obviously different, and it adds another layer to the show where it's like he's there's obviously a homoeroticism in the movie that doesn't really I don't think they were ever going to do that in 1994 with the big name actors that they had.
Right.
Whereas now it's 2023, 2024. That's a lot more socially acceptable. You can do that on TV. Yes. And it just adds so many different layers to the show.
Yes. I mean, at one point, a character who's in the body of a 12-year-old girl says, I can imagine two black cocks slapping each other. She says that. I was like, oh my God. But yeah.
Claudia, we should mention that there's a new Claudia.
I think we should, yes. What do you think about that, by the way?
So at first I didn't realize they really pull a so I've mentioned this, but like I've watched a lot of General Hospital with Athena over the over 15 years that we've been together.
Yeah.
Athena still watches General Hospital almost every day, and I've watched a lot of General Hospital, and it's very common in soap operas for them to be like, starting today, the character of Jason is going to be played by this person. And it's like, wait, what? And it's it's the exact character, but now it's a different actor. And you got to, like, your mind has to get used to it as you go along. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, why'd they recast Claudia? Okay. And I'll say that I really like the Claudia from season 1, but so far, Delaney Hayes is doing an amazing job. You mentioned that one line that she has. She has a line in episode 1 where she's like, I've only known 4 vampires and you're all the worst.
Yeah.
And I can almost imagine like my friends saying that line. And I loved that line of like, I just want a vampire to be good to me. And it's like they meet this like vampire woman in war-torn Europe in like World War II. What country were they in at that point?
Romania.
Were they in Romania? Yeah. And she was like, she felt like almost kinship to this woman for no other reason than she was a new vampire. And the excitement that the new Claudia has upon meeting the vampire theater group is like, you could just tell like she's all about this world, and like Louis, who's been a vampire for forever, is like, well, you gotta be careful. You don't want to get too close. He's very trepidatious, and she's like, let's fucking go.
Yeah. She's definitely like that by the end of the second episode. With Claudia, it's this interesting situation because in the show, she's supposed to have the body of a 12-year-old, right? And she's obviously aged way past that now in the point of the story. But Kirsten Dunst definitely seemed like a little girl, whereas the Claudia in the show seems like a teenager, and she's supposed to have not gone through puberty, right?
Yeah.
So she seems older already to begin with. But then I think the Claudia in the book, as far as Pepper was telling me, is actually like 5 years old. So she's way younger in the book.
Yeah.
Claudia in the book is a representative of Anne Rice's daughter who died. Anne Rice had a little daughter and she died. And then like Lestat, I think, is supposed to be like Anne Rice, basically. Like that's why Lestat's like the hero of all of these books. He's not so much in Interview with the Vampire, but he's like the main guy of all the books, right? With Claudia in this, yeah, she has her kind of views and she's different from Louis and she's much more like evil than Louis. I mean, Louis's not really evil at all, but you know, they all have to kill. And you mentioned
Louis tragic. Like
yeah.
he's overwhelmingly tragic. Like to a point where you almost want to be like, come on, man, like you're a vampire. Like have some fun. Go slap black cocks with each other. Come on. But like I will say, I will say, watching, especially again, like these 2 episodes where she makes it such a point of like all the vampires I've ever known have been assholes. She meets this like female vampire in Romania. The woman throws herself into the fire to kill herself.
Yes.
And then episode 2 in Paris, she meets this like group of vampires and she feels like an instant kinship with them and the joy that she has. And that is, again, like you mentioned, fans of this show have either read the book or they've seen the movie. So we know as the viewers, so it's like, oh, this is cool. Look how much fun she's having. But we know what is going to happen.
Right.
And it is just making that eventual moment so much more gut-wrenching when it happens.
Right.
Because, you know, I don't think it's a spoiler. Claudia's going to die. And like, it's going to be a brutal fucking scene that rips the heart out of Louis and the audience. And it, like, to build her up and give her this hope is almost like really fucking mean of the writers, but it's done so well.
Right.
It feels like this is something she's wanted and something she's earned. And I think that the new actress, Delaney Hayes, is really pulling that off. I think she's doing a great job.
Yeah, 1000%. You are talking about like how we know because of the book, because of the movie, that Claudia is going to die eventually, right? And what's interesting is that if you haven't read the book, you don't know about this sequence where they actually do meet an old vampire before they meet the theater of vampires, right? And Pepper was telling me about it. The vampire they meet prior is like the feral vampire that's in the woods, that creature that's almost like a zombie. And it's a man, and he does throw himself into the fire at the end there, just like the female vampire did. But I think that maybe they made him have like a mother in that first episode because they wanted Claudia to connect with a female vampire, if not temporarily, before she destroys herself. And that's the thing that happens in the vampire books in general, is that if they don't do something that changes their life, if they don't have some kind of crazy event, they end up getting very like depressed and killing themselves because they're just faced with eternity, right? They're like, am I gonna just do this forever?
No, and like I think that, you know, one of the lores just in general of vampires is the eternal life thing. Like, you know, like you said, like Christian Slater asks to be bitten in the original movie, and there's always that allure of vampires that a lot of the other creatures don't have. Right. Where it's like you can live eternal. And, you know, you watch a lot of vampire fiction, and aside from the killing, vampires are glorious. They live a glorious life. You know, that most of the time we watch vampire stuff, they're rich, they have castles, they're surrounded by beautiful people of both genders, and
having sex with them.
Yeah, they're seducing people.
Yeah.
They're it's almost this like glamorous, and then like you think about the fiction, whether it's Twilight, whether it's Buffy, even where she falls in love with every vampire she meets, from Angel to Spike, you name it. It's There's that other side of the equation of, oh, you have an eternal life, so everyone that you love who's a human is going to die
Right.
unless you turn them into vampires. And you're going to, you're going to run out of, life excitement.
Mm-hmm.
There's just going to come a point where you've done it all. You've traveled where you needed to travel. What else is left? And it does face that like depressing kind of foreverness
Yep.
that doesn't really get explored. And I thought that uh, meeting that vampire in the first episode, the woman was very, first of all, like the fact that she like basically murders her own feral
Offspring.
child
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because if he can't see, he can't hunt. And
Right.
so what's he going to do? He's going to starve to death out in the woods. So I might as well put him out of his misery. It's just, there is a, and again, it comes back to Louis, because there's a tragicness to Louis where
Yeah.
everything, no matter how happy he appears, and maybe it's just Jacob Anderson's emotive face. He always
Right.
feels miserable, no matter even if he's in love, if he's, having wild, passionate sex with Armand
Right.
or Lestat. It doesn't matter. He always has this air of like melancholy to him.
That's definitely Louis to a T, whether it's the book or the movie or this. And, it's funny because, like, we talk about how vampires have these great lives and this great existence, but they just have to feed on blood. And, of course, they have to avoid the sunlight as well. But the world, what happens in the world can also, like, affect them and change them, too. And what's interesting about this second season, which is different from the book, different from the original movie, is that they are in a Europe that's a post-World War II Europe. So they're in Romania. I think they might even be in another country before they end up in Romania. But they're like just going through this war-torn countryside, picking out soldiers and, Louis, of course, feasting on rats and things like that. And one of the things that was really interesting this time around, I'm not sure if they've mentioned this in other books and stuff. They definitely don't mention it in the movie, but they mention that, like, the war has affected people's blood, like the blood of the humans, I guess, because maybe they've gone through so much trauma and stuff, has changed the taste of their blood. And what's really interesting is that it's like they're cold because the humans don't have like that vitality to them. And so when they drink the blood, they don't feel the warmth of the blood. It feels cold. And I just really like that aspect. And another thing that was actually really cool too, this is just a little side note, but I love the opening. It's not really credits, but just like the interview with the vampire logo that comes up. And they usually have like the present day, which is like in, I don't know, the Middle East somewhere, and then the past, and it was like New Orleans. Now it actually had like France, and it was being bombed, and they actually had like fighter planes flying in the beginning of the first episode.
Yeah.
And then in the second one, it has like the Eiffel Tower and stuff. But that's another difference, is that World War II setting. And so like world events kind of affect them too, right? Eventually they find themselves in France after World War II is over. And I actually really like the beginning of that second episode too, because you're a history teacher, they're on some like famous French landmark, right? That looks like an angel, or maybe it's like a griffin or something.
Oh,
Do you know what
yeah,
that one
yeah.
is? Yeah.
I know the Eiffel Tower and the Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah. That's where my knowledge ends too. But they start to kind of flourish in France. They kind of get reborn after they've seen that vampire, and they are, in France. Louis starts to become a photographer. And that was an interesting thing for me too, because he's got this hobby now where he's taking pictures of people, and he's, trying to like live this new life. He's got this confidence to him. Sherry was wondering as we were watching it, do vampires show up on film in this? And I was pointing out to her that like the Anne Rice vampires don't really have any of the usual vampire
old Universal Dracula stuff.
Right.
I mean,
right.
like there's scenes where they're staring at themselves in the mirror getting ready. Like
right.
That's like one of the biggest things is that like Dracula was not like in the original 1931 Dracula.
Yeah.
In Todd Browning's Dracula, you don't see Bela Lugosi in the mirror, you know. I like a lot of the, you know, like the thing is like with vampires, it's what can you do that's even a little bit different than what we've seen a million times with vampires. Right. And so, you know, if you can change the lore a little bit, if you can like even that, you know, what you mentioned about which I really love the blood like being almost like sour or cold because of like the misery of World War II.
Right.
Is such an interesting like twist on like vampire lore. Mm-hmm. And this show just keeps doing little things like that. You know, and I know it's based on the book, but I love the idea of the vampire theater where half the crowd are humans and half the crowd are, yeah, I see you like Rocky Horror. Yeah, where it's like there's this element of, oh, wait, is this real? Oh, no, it's a show. Oh, my God, what a great show. And meanwhile, yeah, it's fucking real and it's great. And like, I loved everything about that scene. I was fucking captivated. I watched this last night, I think from like 11:45 at night until 1 a.m. And I partially put this on thinking I'm going to fall asleep. And I'll try to watch it in the morning so that we can talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
And when they walked into that theater and Santiago walks out onto the stage, I just sat there like almost with my mouth like, and oh my God, what an amazing television scene that was. And it just carried through the rest of the episode. And I was like, oh, I'm wide awake now. Let me rent the 1994 movie. And I think I fell asleep last night at like 1:45 because I watched the first friggin' 30 minutes of the 94 movie.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack that theater, the vampires scene. The vampire. I can't even fucking pronounce it like they do in the show. But basically, there's a few changes from the movie, and I don't know if there are changes from the book. But basically, Louis meets Armand. That's the first vampire they meet in France. It's Armand, and he gives him a card to go to the theater. In the movie, it's Stephen Rea who he runs into, or Rhea, he runs into in like the park. And then Armand performs in the theater in the movie. Antonio Banderas is in the performance. In this, Armand is just sitting back like the kind of like the director, the manager of the theater troupe or whatever. As we're watching it, you know, we get a vampire, bleached blonde hair, makeup on, his vampire eyes, you know, are contacts, obviously. But like, you know, I'm watching this guy and I'm like, this guy looks really familiar. And then, of course, you messaged me before, but I made that connection before I read your message. I was like, that's him. Do you want to go ahead and say who it is?
It's the actor Ben Daniels, who we know from the Exorcist series that was on Fox. He was the lead priest who is in both seasons, and he's just fucking amazing. Yep. He's a great actor. Overall in the things that I've seen him in, but he just commanded the screen in this episode.
Yes.
And I, like I said, I was like just floored by his performance, and it carried through the whole episode to the point where I was up into the wee hours. I will say Stephen Rea in the original movie was great.
Absolutely.
And there's always something really creepy about Stephen Rea.
Agreed.
he's just his voice. He has this ability to talk very quietly
Yeah,
and
agreed.
sound menacing,
Mm-hmm.
even when he's not being a menacing character. Like, he's one of my favorite movies ever, and this might upset comic book fans. I don't know,
Uh-oh.
but I fucking love V for Vendetta. It's one of my favorite movies.
It's great. What are you talking
Oh,
about?
okay. No, because between that and Watchmen, I know a lot of people have a lot of different opinions. I love him, Stephen Ray, in V for Vendetta. He plays like the main cop, and he does a lot of narration and a lot of like talking out loud.
Yeah.
And a lot of like exposition-y dialogue, but it in a way that it works within that movie.
Yeah.
And even as a cop, he sounds menacing. Like, and he's, you know, in The Crying Game, and obviously another Neil Jordan movie, which Interview with a Vampire was. But Ben Daniels, man, wow. This is just a character. Maybe it's the character, you know.
Yeah.
How many actors have to play the Joker before we say, how many actors have to win an Oscar for playing the Joker before we go, maybe it's the character.
Right, right.
And not the actors. Maybe the character is just that good that it brings out these performances. And maybe that's the way it is for Santiago in the Interview with a Vampire world.
You know, it's funny that you're going down this path, because Sherry was saying that she doesn't like the second half of the book and the second half of the 1994 movie as much as she likes the beginning, because it's like Lestat's not around, right? So it's like Lestat's gone and you lose this interest. But I love the 1994 movie so much. I love the music. I love the way that things are shot, like just the way that they set up certain shots in that movie. That sequence when Brad Pitt gets his revenge on the Theater of Vampires, that's a fantastic scene with the syncing up of the music, of what's happening in the imagery. Stephen Rea is menacing in that, and I think you're right. It might be the character itself. I like the vampire stuff in both the movie and the show so far, because I like the idea of like vampires like using theater to kind of give their life purpose.
Yeah.
What's really interesting about this theater in this show is that they incorporate like film footage into their play or their plays, because it's like multiple mini plays in one. And so they're like interacting with the screen, which is kind of ahead of its time for that time period. And then they're, of course, using their like vampire powers to do certain kind of effects too. And we have this sequence where he does what Antonio Banderas does in the original movie, where they bring a woman onto the stage and she's like pleading for her life. She's telling everybody, hey, these are real vampires. They're tricking you. These are real vampires. And he kind of like mesmerizes her. But I liked this scene a lot better than the 1994 scene, because he says to her at one point, he's like, well, death has come. Do you want someone to take your place? Your husband? Your son? What about someone here? And he points to a guy in the front row. And then she gives him up. She like nods, you know, like take that guy. And there's two sequences at least where Ben Daniels is looking right at the camera and he's just saying his speech, right? And he says something like, you know, like when you're in church the other day or next time, realize that like, you know, someone was just about to give you up to death, you know, and they'd give you up in a wink. And then he winks like a second later. It's like so over the top, but so like serious at the same time. And I just love that the vampires have like such disgust for humans, you know, that you could tell that like he hates humans in that sequence, you know, right when he's about to kill her. And he's also talking about the romanticism of death. And that's where the title of this episode comes from. One of the cool things about the show is that it has quotes from the book in as the titles of the episode, and then they say them.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, he says
the titles are like super poetic.
Yeah.
Do you know what it means to be loved by death?
Right. He says that to her.
Sounds like a line Ghost would sing.
There you go. Yes, it does actually. Yes. But like when that happens, it's such an upsetting scene. Like there's some vampire movies that I love, like 30 Days of Night, the original Interview with the Vampire. There's these sequences where people are just like at the mercy of vampires and they're just going to slaughter them. And the vampires are like playing with their food, essentially. They're like, you know, you think you're going to get out of this? There's no hope. You're fucking dead. And that's what that scene was. And it, like you said, it was just such a good fucking scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but so then why don't we talk about, go ahead, man, tell about what the little twist is that we see in this that's not in the 1994 movie. What interesting twist about the theater? Yeah.
So they take them down. They're like celebrating post-show, and they make they talk about, oh, well, you know, this theater has been around for so many years thanks to our founding member who we hung this beautiful painting of. And of course, it's fucking Lestat. And also, the few moments we get with Lestat in Louis's mind are freaking great.
Agreed.
And I love the scene at the end where Armand is like almost warning Louis, like, vampires don't like to be lied to. And I could tell right away when you saw that painting, I saw in your mind that you thought you were like, I know him. Oh God. So I don't know what your thing with him was, but either tell us or keep it quiet because we don't like to be lied to. And obviously, I think it's very obvious for me, at least, that Louis is going to be the one that gives up the information in his mind, probably, about Lestat, and is going to be the one that, like, gets Claudia'd.
Okay, well, I know actually one major spoiler because there's a significant difference in the book than in the 1994 movie. And how about I don't tell you?
Yeah, that would be cool. Because I'm going to finish watching the 94 movie tonight.
Yeah. Because what you just said about like, oh, it's going to, like, they're going to pry it from Louis' mind or like he's going to kind of reveal something. It's not that. It's something that's not in the 1994 book. And I think it makes it a lot more interesting. You'll see. I kind of have some thoughts about how this season is going to end. I personally do think that well, let's speculate. Let's do our little fantasy booking, but I want to get one last fucking ticker on here first before we do that. Wasn't that just like the fucking Lost Boys when they go on their hunt and they're all riding motorcycles?
That, you know, I don't think I would have put that together, but now the second I saw the ticker, I was like, oh fuck, that was the Lost Boys. It felt, and like they just arrive at a house and they're like, yeah, let's just go in and eat everybody in there.
Just slaughter everyone, yeah.
Yeah.
And all this shit in the background, it's just so funny. Like Claudia is like eating a guy on the balcony. There's a person that runs out, and then a vampire comes and just like decapitates him and like spikes his head, you know, in like a little.
And then
fountain.
like one person jumps out the window while the building is on fire.
right. It's so despicable, but so great. Yeah. So you want to do the fantasy booking? Like, how do you think, based on the 1994 movie, how do you think that this season is going to end?
Ooh. Well, I think obviously they're going to spend an episode or two going into the background of Lestat in Paris 100+ years earlier. And then we'll the teasers kind of hint at Louis going crazy. Where like he's like talking to himself in the restaurant and he's slamming the table and everybody's looking at him and there's nobody there. And like the ghost of Lestat is just torturing him, even though it's obviously not a ghost because he's still alive. So maybe it's Lestat torturing him on purpose. I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think the big climax of this season will be Claudia dying and Louis getting his revenge.
Agreed.
His like glorious with obviously Armand working with him.
Right.
Because I mean, obviously he's not going to kill Armand. Armand is his, you know, life mate now.
Right.
But the other thing is they say that they've been together for 70 years. Right. So part of me is like, if Lestat comes back, is Lestat would have to come back in the present day.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we get that kind of movie ending
Mm-hmm.
where the big climax of the season is Claudia gets killed, Louis gets his violent revenge, runs off with Armand to start their whirlwind adventure, and then we come back with Daniel, leaving and getting attacked by Lestat, and Lestat being like, "Now let me tell you my version of the story."
Right.
And then that brings us into season 3, and season 3 is the 3 like main vampires come back together and probably just have a weird 3-way for the entire season.
Okay. Can I do my fantasy booking, even though it might kind of be a little spoilery for you?
Go for it. I mean,
I'll leave
look,
out
we're talking about a property that has existed for nearly more than 40 years, 45 years
Yeah.
in book form. And we're talking about a series that's based on a movie that came out legit 30 years ago.
Oh, we got a little comment from Methrid too, or Methrid. Swamp Thing Lestat was great.
Oh, I
Totally
do
agree.
remember that. Yes, I remember the scene in the movie where he's like thrown into the water and the crocodiles like eat his
Yeah.
or they like take him under, and I was like, "Oh shit."
Yeah.
So yeah, I wouldn't mind some Swamp Thing with that. Go for it. I want to hear
All right,
yours.
all right. So I'm gonna leave out this one really juicy part because I think that that's gonna be an oh shit moment in the show. But I'm gonna go to the present day, right? Like it's very clear that Louis and Armand have this kind of thing they want to get out of Daniel. They want to get some information out of Daniel. I think that what happens is that Louis goes to make Daniel a vampire in the 70s, and Armand stops him, and they want to get some clarity on that. Now, Louis kind of already admitted to like misremembering certain things, and there's missing pages from Claudia's diary, right? So I think that what we're going to have in the present day is that Louis kind of realizes how complicit Armand was in Claudia's death in the present day when he's telling the story, and then they're going to have conflict with each other. And then I think that a Lestat that is like fully returned to his regular power is going to show up, and that's probably going to be like the last scene because they're really building up this idea that like Armand, Louis, and Lestat are almost in this like love triangle, and I think that that's going to be the thing. The what Sherry and I had like a little disagreement about was how are they going to go forward with the show in multiple seasons, right? Because only the first book is about Louis, and then he's like a barely a supporting character in the rest of the books. Like Lestat is the main thing, right? Now, I think you'd be fine with that, especially because people love Sam Reed as Lestat so much. But there's one problem. I think that you have this like African American gay character as the lead in this, and if you were to like take him out of the show, people would be really upset about that, right? So how do you like keep the interview going? How do you keep Louis in the picture? And that's where it gets a little tricky. I think that they're starting to kind of prepare themselves for that because they have Armand now talking during the interviews. So I think like it's the idea of like interview with the vampire could be any one of the vampires in the story.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Louis.
That's I agree, and I think that you can take this in the Anne Rice way of like, I know that like you said, there's Interview with a Vampire, and then there's the Vampire Lestat, the Vampire Armand, and maybe maybe this season ends the Interview with a Vampire, and then season 3 is Interview with a Vampire, the Vampire Lestat.
Maybe, yeah.
Episode or season 4 is Interview with a Vampire, the Vampire Armand, and we get them as becoming the main unreliable narrator, and we get to Louis is still involved, but he's no longer the lead
main
in the
guy.
And I think that that's a perfectly acceptable way of doing things, given that these are based on the Anne Rice properties.
Yeah.
what was the other Anne Rice series that we started watching and we gave up on?
Yeah, you cut the legs
The
off my
witches,
joke.
the Mayfair Witches.
I had a joke lined up, Danny. I was gonna say, and then you just cut the legs right under
I'm
me.
so
No, it's because I was like, at least it's not the Mayfair Witches, blah blah, because that show sucked, and that's
It
in the
was
same
not
fucking
good.
universe as this.
I know. Yeah, it was very disappointing. We kind of gave up on that one after just a few episodes. We were like, yeah, this is just not worth it.
Yeah.
But hey, as I've gotten older, I realized sometimes when it comes to TV and shows, it's easier to cut bait than to wait around and hope it gets better.
Fuck yeah.
But
so, what do you call it? I wanted to do like some plugs. Did you have anything else you want to say about these 2 episodes?
no, I think we've done a good rundown of them.
So I want you to do your usual plug of what's on our channel, but we mentioned a couple of things during this discussion. We mentioned Ben Daniels and how much we love him. You guys should definitely check out our Exorcist TV show reviews on our channel if you get a chance, because he's fantastic in that. Maybe that'll make you guys check out that show too. I feel bad for the other
streaming
priests.
Somewhere.
I think like Hulu.
Yeah, I think we watched it for free, like not for free, but we watched it on a streaming service that we pay for. So
yeah,
we didn't have to rent episodes.
I feel bad because Ben Daniels, he's in this and he's fucking great. He's on this horrible show Jupiter's Legacy, but he was great on that. He's in House of Cards. Sherry said he's in the show called Flesh and Bone, which is amazing. But then the other priest in The Exorcist is in like Rebel Moon.
So yes, I saw that and I was like, oh no.
He got the short end of the stick there. But yeah, you guys check out those videos, and then you could check out our Mayfair Witches review too, because Danny and I did have to sit through a couple of those episodes. But besides that, Danny, what's going on our channel?
Well, aside from vampires, it's been apes. We've been all up in the apes. We just posted our we did a nice long review, a deep dive into the original 1968 Planet of the Apes and its first sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, that went live on the channel this morning. We have a full review of the new Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which is out in theaters now. I have short reviews up for several of the Apes movies, including the reboot series with Rise, Dawn, and War. And on Saturday, we're going to be recording our finale of Apes Month, I believe, where we're going to cover the final 3 films in the original Planet of the Apes franchise, Escape, Conquest, and Battle. And we might even talk about the 2001 Planet of the Apes remake, which I just rewatched. And boy, howdy, that movie is a lot worse than I remember. Wow. It is brutal. And then we will do a mega ranking of all the Apes movies. We'll rank them from 1 to 9, and then we'll talk about number 10, which is the 2001 Planet of the Apes.
Yes, man, 2001. That wasn't a great year for a couple different reasons, but yeah, that movie was one of them. Anyway, we got to get going, but thank you so much for watching us. If you're new to the channel because you like interview, go ahead, man.
Oh no, I was just gonna say to the person who commented, yeah, thank you for watching, thank you for commenting. Always a pleasure to have comments and some interaction. So that was cool.
Yeah, guys, comment on our shit, like it, and make sure you subscribe to the Lastercast because we're here for the rest of the interview with the vampire.